began with a clip, buried deep in the archives, suddenly resurfacing at the worst possible time. A young, commanding Barack Obama at the podium, speaking words that cut sharper today than when he first delivered them. And sitting just feet away in this decade's chamber was Joe Biden, the very man those words now seemed to condemn. As the video rolled, the air thickened, eyes darted, and the question was unavoidable. How could two allies stand on opposite ends of the same sentence? Stay with us, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because this is the moment a speech from the past came back to haunt the present. It began as routine. The Joint Policy Forum was supposed to focus on budget priorities, foreign aid, and the usual partisan clashes. Senators shuffled papers, aides whispered, cameras panned across the rows of faces. President Biden sat quietly at the head table, flanked by advisors, the weight of the office draped on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Then, in the middle of a procedural lull, a senator requested that the clerk cue a video for context. "It's relevant to the debate," he said, voice deceptively calm. No one expected fireworks. Most leaned back, assuming it was another chart, another statistic. The screens flickered. Grainy footage appeared, the timestamp unmistakably dated. More than a decade ago, the sound came alive, crisp despite its age. Barack Obama's unmistakable cadence. "We cannot continue to reward the same Washington insiders who helped create the mess we are in. Accountability is not optional. Leadership is not a gift, it is earned." The words boomed across the chamber, and there, frozen on the split-screen camera feed, sat Joe Biden, the long-serving insider, the sitting president, the very man those sentences seemed to cut against. Reporters in the gallery straightened in their seats, pens twitching over notepads. Photographers snapped furiously, capturing the juxtaposition. Obama's younger self, fierce and unyielding, looming on the screens above Biden's weathered face, expression tightening by the second. Biden's allies shifted uncomfortably, whispering into each other's ears. One aide leaned forward, lips pressed tight, muttering, "Why would they roll this now?" Another shook his head. "They're setting him up." Obama's voice continued, uncompromising. "The problem is not just policies, it is the culture of career politicians who promise change but protect the same old system." A ripple moved through the room. Every ear caught the line. Every eye glanced at Biden. 4 decades in Washington, emblem of the system itself. Tuberville smirked from the back row. AOC leaned forward, pen tapping the desk. The chamber's energy shifted. What was meant to be neutral suddenly felt like a trial. Biden exhaled slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. He didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He simply sat still, the words of his former running mate bouncing around the marble walls like accusations. The irony was brutal. Obama's speech, once hailed as visionary, now looked like an indictment. And Biden was the one in the witness box. The words were old. The silence they created was brand new. The video rolled on, Obama's voice rising with that familiar fire. The cadence that once electrified arenas now cut across marble walls like a sharpened blade. Real change means standing up not just to the other party, but to your own when it fails the people. It means saying no to those who have been here too long, who think experience excuses responsibility. Gasps rippled faintly through the chamber. A senator in the second row raised his eyebrows, almost in disbelief. Reporters looked up from their notepads, eyes flicking from the screens to Biden. There he was, not the man in the video, but the one seated just feet below it. Older, heavier with time, 4 decades in the system Obama was railing against. His face tightened. He shifted in his chair, clearing his throat, as though to remind the room that he was still present, still powerful. But the optics were merciless. Obama's younger self thundering about insiders, Biden embodying the very definition of the word. Tuberville chuckled softly, his laugh sharp enough to carry across the microphones. AOC shot him a glare, but the damage was done. The contrast was playing out live, broadcast straight to millions of screens. Biden leaned toward his aide, whispering something too quiet for cameras to catch. The aide nodded quickly, jotting notes as if preparing a rebuttal, but the timing wasn't his to control. Obama's voice filled the space again. "We cannot look the American people in the eye and tell them that the same men who presided over failure will now deliver victory. That is not hope. That is hypocrisy. The word hypocrisy landed like a gavel strike. A low murmur swept the gallery. A reporter mouthed, "Did he just say that?" Another shook his head. "This is brutal." Biden's jaw flexed, his eyes narrowing slightly. He adjusted his tie, fingers tugging at the knot, a telltale sign of discomfort. For a man known for his grin, there was no smile now. Only the silent weight of words spoken by a partner turned prosecutor. Some Democrats on the dais looked down at their papers, refusing to meet his eye. Others stared openly, their expressions caught between sympathy and unease. They knew what everyone knew. The video wasn't aimed at Biden back then, but here in this chamber, in this moment, it was a blade aimed squarely at him. The chairman tapped his gavel lightly, more to steady the room than to interrupt. But it didn't work. The tension was alive, pulsing through every seat, every microphone, every blinking camera light. And then Obama's younger self delivered the line that froze even Biden's defenders. "If we want something different, we cannot keep choosing the same." A staffer in the back row exhaled sharply. A journalist whispered, "That's going viral." All eyes shifted back to Biden. He lifted his chin slightly, forcing composure, but his silence was deafening. The laughter, the murmurs, the smirks around him were no longer directed at the video. They were directed at him. An old promise replayed, a new contradiction revealed. The footage cut to another clip, the timestamp flashing across the lower corner. 2007. Obama stood at a rally podium, sleeves rolled up, his voice thunderous and unyielding. "We cannot entrust the future of this nation to those who have spent decades in Washington, voting for wars we should never have fought, siding with banks over workers, and telling Americans one thing while doing another behind closed doors." The line landed like a detonation. Reporters' pens flew. Photographers swiveled to capture Biden, his jaw locked, his eyes narrowing under the scrutiny. The cameras framed it mercilessly. The man who had spent 40 years in Washington, who had voted for wars and brokered deals with banks, now sitting under Obama's very words. A senator leaned toward her aide and whispered audibly enough for nearby mics, "That's Biden's record in one sentence." The aide nodded, typing furiously on his phone. Crockett, seated a few rows down, crossed her arms, eyes fixed on Biden. Tuberville smirked again, whispering to a colleague, "He's describing his own VP." The line, caught by a nearby microphone, spread quickly among the reporters. Biden shifted forward, gripping the desk, his voice low but firm. That speech was about a different time, a different context. His words barely carried over the hum of murmurs. But the clerk, flipping through documents as though on cue, projected Biden's Senate voting record onto the second screen. The contrast was stark. The very wars Obama had condemned, Biden's votes highlighted in bold. The very banking deregulations, his name marked AYE. The room gasped, not because it was unknown, but because the juxtaposition was inescapable. Obama's fiery words from the past, Biden's inked record from the same years. One reporter whispered, "They don't even have to argue." "The paper argues itself," another added. "This is devastating optics." Biden raised his chin, his voice louder now. "I've served this country for decades. Service means adapting, making hard choices, being in the room when decisions matter." But Obama's voice cut back in before the sentence was done. The recording, relentless. Real leadership is not about being in the room. It's about being willing to walk out when the people are being sold out. The chamber froze. The overlap was too brutal, too precise. Biden's defense crumbled midair, buried under a line spoken years before he ever stood at the top of the ticket. Even his allies avoided his gaze. One Democratic senator lowered his head into his hands. A Republican leaned back with a satisfied grin. The contrast had done the damage, and no rebuttal could erase it. What began as a flashback was now a reckoning. The chamber, which had started the session in routine boredom, now vibrated with unease. The old footage played like a ghost, pressing its hand on every shoulder. Obama's younger self leaned into the mic on screen, his voice carrying the clarity of conviction unsoftened by compromise. The American people are tired of leaders who change their tune depending on where the cameras are. They deserve consistency, not convenience. Every eye drifted back to Biden. The weight of the line was unmistakable. The man sitting under the lights had spent decades shifting, recalibrating, surviving by adjusting. Now, under Obama's words, survival looked like surrender. Reporters scribbled furiously, some abandoning shorthand for full sentences. Obama's speech resurrected. Biden targeted by his own past ally. Others tapped rapid-fire updates into live blogs. Chamber stunned as Obama words sting Biden directly. Tuberville leaned back, arms folded, grinning wide enough for cameras to catch. He whispered, "This is better than any attack ad we could have paid for." Across the aisle, Democrats shifted uncomfortably. Some glared at Tuberville, but even their glares looked hollow. They couldn't deny what the screen showed. One senator muttered under her breath, "This is brutal timing." Another simply shook his head, murmuring, "It's not timing." Its truth, Biden finally moved. He placed his palms flat on the desk, leaned toward the mic, and spoke, his tone measured, almost pleading. "Look, context matters. Every leader evolves. Every decision is weighed against the realities of its time. That's what governing is. Not speeches, but choices." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, weighing his defense. But then Obama's younger self reappeared on the screen, the words already cued, unrelenting. "Don't tell us evolution is an excuse. Don't tell us that shifting with the political winds is leadership. Real leadership is holding firm, even when it costs you." The overlap was merciless. Biden's defense collapsed against the archival rebuttal, as if history itself had prepared for this moment. A murmur swept through the chamber, heavier this time. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed looks. Photographers angled their lenses to capture Biden's face, tightened, pale, his jaw flexing with each syllable of the old recording. In the gallery, staffers whispered frantically, their phones buzzing with push alerts. Obama speech trending. Old words, new battle. By the time the video hit TikTok, the caption would read itself. Obama roasts Biden before he was president. The chairman tapped his gavel half-heartedly, but no one looked at him. The gavel couldn't erase the words echoing through the marble. And for the first time, Biden's allies didn't rush to defend. Their silence was louder than the speech itself. The chamber heard it once. The nation replayed it endlessly. By the time the committee recessed for a break, the first 45-second clip had already escaped into the bloodstream of the internet. A shaky live stream capture hit Twitter with the caption, "Obama once said this." Biden sits silent. In less than 15 minutes, it was retweeted over 100,000 times. TikTok lit up with edits. Side-by-side split screens, young Obama thundering, "We cannot entrust the future to the same insiders." While Biden sat today, chin down, eyes tight, lips sealed. Creators added dramatic music, bold captions flashing, past verses. Present within hours, the hashtag Obama versus Biden trended globally. On Instagram Reels, the contrast became a meme. Obama's face labeled hope, Biden's expression labeled hypocrisy. College students reposted it with captions like, "This is brutal, and history eats its own." Veterans of politics shook their heads privately, but their aides were already texting them links. Cable news anchors broke into regular programming. MSNBC called it the resurfaced speech moment rattling Washington. CNN ran a banner that read, "Obama's old words, Biden's new burden." Even Fox, usually eager for spectacle, didn't need to spin. The images spun themselves. Talk radio lines lit up. Callers, angry and incredulous, repeated Obama's words as though they had been spoken that morning. He said it himself. No more insiders. What's Biden if not that? Another voice cut through. It's like watching a father scold a son in public. Podcasts scrambled to drop emergency episodes. One titled theirs bluntly, Obama's Ghost Versus, Biden's Record. Inside the White House, aides gathered in a war room, screens glowing with trending hashtags. One whispered urgently, "We can't get ahead of this. It's everywhere." Another, shaking his head, muttered, "This is not opposition research. This is Obama himself." And in diners, dorm rooms, and offices across the country, people didn't need pundits to tell them what they saw. They replayed the moment, pointed at the screen, and said aloud what the headlines later wrote. Biden sat silent. What had started as a procedural hearing had become a viral spectacle, not because of new words, but because old ones had found new life. The words had ended. The expressions kept speaking. When the committee reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. It wasn't the same chamber that began the morning with the scripted talking points and rote exchanges. It was a courtroom now, and the jury was written on every face. Biden returned to his seat with deliberate composure, but the weight of the viral clips was visible. His smile, that trademark grin that had carried him through decades of campaigns, never surfaced. Instead, he pressed his lips together, nodding stiffly at aides who pretended optimism they didn't feel. Around him, allies showed the strain. One Democratic senator hunched over his folder, doodling in the margins, eyes down. Another glanced repeatedly at the press gallery, clearly aware that every gesture might become the next viral screenshot. A congresswoman leaned toward her aide and whispered, "This looks bad. Really bad." Reporters, meanwhile, scribbled less and stared more. Their pens wrote fragments now. Grim, tension visible. Biden avoids eye contact. The camera zoomed on Biden's hands, fingers interlocked tightly, knuckles whitening as Obama's words continued to hover like a ghost in the room. Tuberville's smirk plastered back on, leaned toward a colleague and muttered, "He's cooked." The microphones didn't pick it up clearly, but lip readers on Twitter would have it circulating within the hour. And then there was the public gallery, ordinary citizens, veterans, students, activists. Their faces told the story reporters couldn't spin. Some shook their heads slowly, disappointment etched into their expressions. Others simply sat still, arms folded, waiting for a defense that never came. Biden attempted one more push. Leaning into the mic, he said, "I respect President Obama, and I respect his words. But leadership is not about holding on to speeches from the past. It's about facing the challenges of today." But the chamber's silence swallowed the words. They sounded less like conviction and more like survival. And everyone knew it. Even his defenders faltered. One longtime ally sighed audibly and muttered, "It's hard to fight your own shadow." Another dropped her pen, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes darting to the floor. The chairman glanced at his gavel, but didn't lift it. He didn't need to. The order wasn't his to restore. The silence had already taken control. The contradiction was no longer theoretical. It was visible, written on every face that refused to look Biden directly in the eye. The speech had ended, but its echo was louder than anything happening now. The speech was old. The silence it created was timeless. The chamber had gone through every phase: laughter, murmurs, mace, whispers. But by the final stretch, there was only quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't beg to be filled, but forces everyone to sit in it. The clerk, almost reluctantly, let the last clip play. Obama's younger self stood tall, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp with conviction. His voice rang through the speakers one final time. "If we truly want change, we must stop rewarding the same old politics. Because when you choose the same, you guarantee the same." The line lingered. It wasn't thunderous applause or fiery crescendo. It was calm, final, merciless. Every head in the gallery turned toward Biden. He sat still, hands folded, his jaw set tight. For once, he didn't try to interrupt. He didn't try to spin. He didn't even try to smile. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they were watching a moment that would replay endlessly on loop. One wrote in the margin of her notebook, "Obama ended it for him." Biden leaned slightly forward as if to speak. The microphone light blinked red, waiting. But no words came. He closed his mouth, leaned back slowly, and lowered his eyes. That was the image. Not the speech, not the policy, not the statistics. The image of Joe Biden, silenced by the ghost of Barack Obama's words. The chairman gavelled the session to a close. The sound echoed, but it wasn't the gavel people remembered. It was the last line on the screen, glowing in captions across every feed. "When you choose the same, you guarantee the same." Cameras zoomed out, the feed ended, but the silence didn't. Was Obama's old speech the most devastating rebuke Biden has ever faced? Or was it just history being twisted in the wrong moment? Tell me what you think in the comments. Don't forget to hit subscribe because the next clash will be even bigger.